Welcome back to the IE427 Garage, everybody. We are continuing work on Jim's Mark IV, and today I am working on the last bits of the fuel system. As you recall in some of the previous videos, we've pretty much redone the fuel line all the way from the tank to the front of the car. And one of the last components that we have to deal with is adding a fuel filter. So stick around and I'll bring you back and we'll take a look at that. Alright, so fuel system on Jim's car. What we found was that the fuel filter for this car was way in the back of the car next to the tank, and it's running a mechanical fuel pump. And that's not ideal. You really don't want to have to pull from the tank through a filter with a mechanical pump all the way in the front of the car. So what we did in the back is we changed the 5/16 line that fed from the tank to the filter and from the filter into the 3/8 hard line, and we changed it all to 3/8 line all the way to the tank. So we used a combination of obviously the hard line and some 3/8 soft line and some fittings, and we put a new fuel pickup tube in the tank. In the front of the car, what we did is we tied on to the first section of steel tubing, 3/8 steel tubing that was run along the frame rail of the car. We tied onto it there, and we continued that 3/8 all the way to the front of the car, all the way across the front tube that crosses over from the passenger side to the driver's side. And then we transitioned to some rubber fuel line into the pump. Now, somewhere we had to put an inline fuel filter, and I always like to make them after the fuel pump. Now, whether they're before or after a regulator in a carbureted setup really doesn't matter, or it doesn't matter to me. I'm sure there's someone out there that's going to disagree with me, but I don't think it matters one way or the other. I think it's better to have clean fuel going through the fuel pressure regulator than any particulate matter that may be in the fuel tank. But you know, to each their own. So what I did yesterday is I tried to find a way to mount our Summit Racing, I think it's a 40 micron? I think it's a 40 micron filter that we picked up into the fuel line system in the front of the car. And this fuel filter's kind of cool. It's got a 6AN swivel connector on one side, and that's a female. And then on the other side, it's got a fixed male outlet. And it worked out really good. The only problem was that it sent the line directly towards our steering shaft. And so I had to be a little bit creative in the manner in which I got the fuel line redone. Now you can see the fuel line could have been shorter, and it was before if there was no fuel filter in line, but I couldn't see another place to put the fuel filter even if we put it post regulator because of the way the fuel line is routed up to the stacks. If we had a carburetor, I would have had a better shot of it because I probably could have put it right before the carburetor. But here's what I chose to do. So down in here you can see our fuel filter is right here, and so it comes off of a male nipple out of the mechanical fuel pump, and then here is the female swivel that is part of our fuel filter. And then out of there what I did was I took some tube nuts and some tube sleeves and a brand new piece of stainless tubing. And what I had to do is I had to get it far enough away from that filter so I could make a U-bend back towards the regulator up here. And so I did that, and then I bent a 90 up and then 90 in. And it came out, for what it is, it came out really clean. I wish I could have made it shorter. And I thought about even putting a 90-degree swivel here. But just remember, every time you add a fuel line fitting, you're adding a potential for a leak. And so it becomes, you start adding on to all those multiple points of failure, and at some point one of them is going to fail. So if you can minimize those points of failure, you're going to have less chance down the road of having a leak or something like that in any of these lines, if you can minimize the amount of junctions or joints, connections that you have in a fuel line. So by doing that one piece there and not putting a swivel and a 90 and more fittings, the line's a little bit longer, but honestly I think it really comes out to be a better solution because I think we'll have less potential for leaking. So the next thing I'm moving on to, and I put a call into Speed Hut gauges this morning because these are some of the original Factory 5 Speed Hut gauges that were supplied with some of the kits. This kit's from 2010, I believe. And we are having an issue that I found out about just recently. Jim told me that the temperature gauge in the car isn't reading. And so the easiest fix, obviously, is just going to be to change the sensor and see if that helps. If that's not it, I've got to get into some wiring for the fuel level sensor in the back. But my wiring is actually in the front underneath the dash. I'll check to make sure the wires are terminated properly and that the gauge has power and all that stuff. But since I already have to order another gauge sender, I had Jim order both. And then he can hold on to the temperature sensor if that's not an issue, and he'll have it in the future if it ever fails. Or hell, I can even buy it from him. But what I found while I was working on the car was that as I tightened down one of the nuts on the oil pressure sender, the terminal was loose. Now, I don't know if it was something that I did. So this back terminal right there is just loose. And I used a nut driver to put that on. So it's not like I put a ratchet on it and torqued that thing down. I hadn't even snugged it up when I could feel that it was moving. So we ordered a new sensor, and the new sensor actually has spade lugs on it. So the spade lugs will allow both types of connectors to be used. The eyelet connectors or the female spade connectors that just slide on. And I think we may opt to just put spade connectors on the end of the wires and then slide them on to the sensor so that there's no chance of them getting over torqued in the future. But so we've got that on order. We've got the water temperature sensor on order. And then what I'm working on this afternoon is I'm getting the oil pan all ready to go in. Now that means that I'm going to have to make sure that the gasket that we have is correct, that the oil pickup that we ordered is correct, and that I get the surface of the block all cleaned up. I'm probably going to do one more scrape with the razor blade and then around with acetone just to make sure that we get any surface imperfections taken care of so that this thing will seal up. I'm inclined to put a little bit of Edelbrock gasket cinch onto the pan rails, onto the oil pan rails. Gasket cinch is a kind of like a contact cement, and so what it allows you to do, and it's flexible too. What it allows you to do is put it on both surfaces. So I can put it on the pan rail, I can put it on the gasket, and then I can lay the gasket in place once the stuff tacks up, and it'll hold the gasket in place. Because as this whole thing goes up into place, it's nice that the gasket doesn't move. And normally I don't put any sealant on between the gasket and the pan anyways. The only sealant that I'm going to use would be around any of the main cap areas, or areas where like the front timing cover mate to the actual block. And so we'll still do that, but I normally don't put a bead all the way around the oil pan, because the oil pan is made to basically go in dry. Even the one-piece units that are that kind of like the rubber composition material now. So I'm going to work on getting that all squared away today, and then I'm hoping that tomorrow after work I'll have had everything cleaned up tonight, and then I'll be able to put the oil pan in tomorrow, and then probably the following night I'll fill it with oil. I'll get the dipstick tube all measured out, and then we'll see where we lie on parts that are ordered. I've also got to go to the upholstery shop and see if I can pick up some carpet for this thing. So Jim's car is undoubtedly coming off the lift in about 4 days. I've got to get back working on the 25th anniversary car. So we're gonna swap things around, and then we're having a car come in from Texas, another project, in 4 days. So I'm going to be moving cars around on that 4th day, not just the 2 cars that we have here, but bringing a new project in the shop as well. So I've got to get some space made in the shop. So I'm kind of rambling on. I'm going to get back to work. I'm going to get that oil pan rail on the block all cleaned up and ready to receive our new pan and gasket, and I'll catch back up with you all tomorrow. All right, so oil pan is in. I got it all put in place this morning, and I got all of the nuts for the studs torqued down just about 20 minutes ago. So I'm going to go up top. I'm going to start putting some oil in it. I'll probably start with 6 quarts. This is an 8-quart pan. So the 8-quart pan means it holds 8 quarts without the amount that goes into the filter. So the filter will be filled separately. I'll unscrew that. It's just temporarily screwed in. And we'll fill it with oil, and that will be the actual amount of oil that goes in it. Once that is all done, I will verify the amount with the dipstick, which I now have in place. And there are instructions on the Canton website on how to adjust the level for the dipstick. Basically, if it is, if it is low on the dipstick after you add all your recommended amount of oil, then you cut the tube little by little until it appears on the dipstick where you want. If it's too high, then you have to make a new mark on the dipstick itself. So, but like I said, it's on their website, and I believe all of the oil pan manufacturers have something similar on their website that you can go by in order to adjust your dipstick level. So that portion of this is done. I'm going to lower the car back down, and then once that's done, I'll start putting some oil in this thing. Jim had just stopped by, and he picked up our excess power battery that is going to be going back, and he also dropped off our sensors. So we have the speed hut sensors for the oil pressure and temperature for the coolant, and those are in this box. So we'll unpack those. Well, I've got the lift up in the air. I may just go ahead and pull the oil pressure sensor out and replace it with the new one. And then once I get the car down, I can go ahead and replace the coolant temperature sensor with the one that Jim dropped off. So hang on, and I'll get to work on that. All right, here is the old sensor, and you can see where I broke off the terminal. Now keep in mind, I didn't use a whole lot of pressure. I was simply tightening those up with a nut driver. No wrench, no socket, just a nut driver. So it doesn't take much, and those things like to snap. Now I think Speed Hut, in their infinite wisdom, decided that they would change over to a sensor. I don't know if, can you see it up there? It's right there. Let's see if we can get you around the other side. So you should be able to see it right there. They changed it out, so now it has male spade connectors coming off of it. And they provide you with some female spade connectors to put on your wires. And we may do that. I've got the tool to crimp it on, and then I can put some heat shrink over it, and it'll all be good. But so there it is. It's all in. It's in place. And I'm going to run up to the top, and I'm going to go ahead and probably get the coolant temperature sensor taken care of while I'm at it as well. Now I did, while I was down here, I went ahead and I pulled the oil filter down, and I filled it with about a half a quart of the motor oil that Jim had dropped off previously. And so that's all filled and ready to go. I have 6 quarts in the pan. I am not seeing any leaks anywhere, but keep in mind we haven't run the engine yet either. So we probably won't see any leaks from the pan rail up and until we start the car and it builds oil pressure, and then it wants to push the oil out if there's any gaps anywhere. I'm hoping not. With 6 quarts in there, I'm hoping that I will or won't be able to actually see a level on the dipstick, and then I'll determine by putting 2 more quarts in to bring it to our 8-quart capacity what we need to do to adjust our dipstick. And hopefully it's perfect or close to. If it's not, and we just have to trim a little bit off the dipstick tube, that'll be great. If it is too short, then that's a whole different issue. Then we're going to have to make a new mark on the dipstick, and what I may do is see if I've got a longer dipstick upstairs. If I do, then we might try that. But yeah, we're going to continue working on this, and I'll bring you back when I've got something else to show you. Little music update for you. Heart, the wolf. All right, so I wasn't happy with the dipstick just being held in place by the stop nut and compression fitting at the bottom. So I made myself a little bracket right here. I just used a piece of 2" by 1.5" aluminum L metal, cut it in about a 3/4 to 1 inch strip, drilled a couple holes in it, used a couple of pieces of hardware here. That's the ground that we have going in the block, so I drilled a hole there, drilled a hole over on this side, and then used a it's not really a cushion clip, it's one of these specialty fasteners for fuel lines and whatnot that I had kicking around here. It actually goes through and mounts with a in this case we're using a nylock lock nut, but you can drill and tap into a frame member for those and use them that way as well. So I've got that all mounted. You can see it's nice and secure. It doesn't move anywhere. And I have checked and adjusted it for level. I just had to cut about, less than 1/4 inch off the top of the tube right here to make it read right where it's supposed to read. And I just wanted it just under the highest most hash mark on the dipstick indicator. So it will read full when Jim has 8 quarts in it, a fresh filter, and the filter filled with oil. So this part is all done. So I think I'm going to move over to the driver's side of the car, and I'm going to work on that oil pressure sensor, trying to get the wires re-terminated on the top of that thing. All right, as you can see, we've got the sensor all wired up now, so it should be good to go. We've got the brand new spade connectors put on there, so now it's not a matter of tightening nuts onto studs and possibly stripping them out or breaking the studs off this way. It just slides on, easy peasy, and we should be ready to go. So I think what I'm going to move on to is the coolant temperature sensor. So I'm gonna lower the car down, crack that loose. Hopefully the coolant level is gonna drop. We should have some air in the system right now, and the coolant level should drop in the engine block, and that should allow us to pull that sensor out without making a complete mess. But we'll see. If I see that it's going to start leaking, I'll just drain a little coolant out of the radiator and we can put it back in. It's not a big deal. So I'm going to move on to that, get this thing lowered down. All right, so the temperature sensor is right here. So we've got that swapped out. Again, I don't know that there's anything wrong with it, but it just made sense since it's the easiest thing to change. To start there, you know, the sensor's about 20 bucks. Directly from Speed Hut. I don't know what the shipping costs, but that way at least we know that if the gauge still doesn't work, that the sensor's good. We'll hold on to it and we'll have a spare for Jim. And then I tried to reroute the wires a little bit. The wires were right across the top of the coil, and so I'm just trying to get as much distance from the coil as I possibly can, thinking that maybe this is throwing interference to that, because it was running right next to it. And so I tie wrapped it down here next to the coil, and hopefully we've got enough distance there that it's not going to cause any interference. If it does still, and we have no other explanation for why the gauge isn't working properly, then we're going to have to reroute this wire right here somewhere else. But we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to work on getting these door catches squared away. This one's loose. The one on the other side isn't that loose, but it's still loose. And we want to put a one-piece spacer rather than the stacked washers there like we normally do, and then get those all adjusted. We'll make sure the doors open and close properly. So I'm going to work on that the rest of the day. It's getting late. It's close to dinner time, but I'm going to try to knock at least one, if not both of those out before I go in for the evening. And I'll catch up with you guys tomorrow. Okay, it's the next day, everybody. We did get the spacers in for the door strikes, and I've already got Jim's car cover sitting back in here. And this one's not really easy to see, but right here you can see there's just a one-piece spacer in there for the door strike. Now we've got the door adjusted and it's closing nice. Since the seat's out on this side, it's going to be much easier to see. Oh, sorry, seat's in over here. What was I thinking? Anyways, it is easier to see on this side because it projects out just a little bit further, so you can see the spacer in there. And same thing over here. We've got this adjusted. Door closes really nice. You can see I'm moving on to some other things that are going to be covered in the next video, but I've got the steering wheel out, and I've still got to patch these holes, so I'm going to be working in behind the dash. But I'm going to close this one out. So, as always, I want to thank you guys for watching. If you're enjoying the content, please do the like, the share, the subscribe, all that good stuff. We'll see you next time. Have a great day.